We are reading Dragonfruit by Makiia Lucier, Chapter 7. Who's this then? Sam strode along the cliff's edge, watching the ship approach. A dragoner by the look of things. There was no mistaking the shape of that hull. It had sailed near enough for him to see the figures crowded onto the deck, turned toward the shore and him. The sight made his blood quicken. A dragon ship usually meant sea dragons. Sea dragons for the last 10 years meant hope. Whose ship was it? The night had a rain-swept feel, earthy and damp after the typhoon. Nutmeg scented the air, along with cinnamon and clove, a hint of mace. Under the light of the full moon, Sam could make out the flag whipping about the mainmast, a red cypress against a white background. This ship sailed for Esperanza. When the name painted along the side came into view, Sam planted his boots wide and folded his arms, scowling into the night. The anemone. His hopes plummeted as quickly as they had risen. He had no use for the ship and no love for its captain. The last the last time Bragadin had docked at Tamarind Harbor, he had sold 2 sea dragons to Sam, very costly animals. Both had turned out to be sickly, the memory of which had Sam's temper soaring all over again. "What do you think, Fetu?" Sam wondered aloud. "Should we let the good captain anchor, or send him on his way?" Sam wore the uniform of the Royal Guard, plain trousers tucked into boots, tunic capped high on his arms, its color the green of the jungle that rose up behind him. What looked like a tattoo of a bat covered his right arm. Inked from shoulder to elbow, its wings furled and its head tipped low as if in sleep. A tiny pearl cuff rested above his right foot. Hearing Sam's voice, the bat lifted his head. Small eyes blinked. Small eyes opened, blinking sleepily. Fetu's wings unfurled, rising from Sam's skin, ink becoming fur and flesh and bone, as real as the thousands of fruit bats that made their home in the jungles and caves of Tamarind. Tattoos, or markings, were common in the Nomi Nomi. Men wore them proudly on every part of their body from scalp to toe, as did many women. The cost of a true tattoo master was dear, accessible only to the wealthy or to the eldest children whose parents sometimes saved for years. Those with lesser means made do with an apprentice tattooist or worse, a dabbler. Cheap markings were often rough, lacking finer detail. Some were just plain ugly, which was unfortunate once a marking which was unfortunate because a marking once placed could not be displaced, though there were exceptions. Markings like Fetu were not the work of a tattoo master. They appeared on their own, without warning, in the shape of an animal, and usually during a Tamarindi's early adulthood, between the ages of 15 and 20. Unlike a normal tattoo, these markings did not stay put. They moved along the skin at will, sliding over arms and legs, faces and backs. Sometimes they rose from the flesh, taking the form of living animals, companions and guardians until death. Fetu climbed up Sam's arm and perched on his shoulder like a bird, not a bat. He did not answer Sam's question about Captain Bragadin because fruit bats did not speak. Instead, Fetu patted his head against Sam's ear. It was enough, though. Sam said, "Agreed. Let's get rid of him." "Samati," a deep voice said by his shoulder. Sam flailed so close to the edge his boots sent pebbles scattering over the cliff and into the abyss. He cast a sour look at the man who stood inches away, trying not to look amused. Sam's heart thumped wildly. At least he had not screamed. "Uncle," Sam offered in greeting. "I didn't see you there." "Clearly. Otherwise you would not be caught talking to a bat," Uncle Isco said. Not Sam's blood uncle, but his parents' oldest friend. Back when his father was living and his mother was sound. He was shorter than Sam. Most people were. Wide-shouldered, with stern features. He wore an elaborate sand-colored cloak made of tapa. A heavy necklace lay around his neck, 8 strands of gleaming white cockle shells. It was a reminder that Sam, too, should have been dressed in tapa and shells. He should have been at supper. Guilt had Sam hunching his shoulders. "Did my grandmother send you?" "She did not." Sam's glance was full of skepticism. Tonight, his uncle's markings appeared on the side of his neck. A shark's head looking upward, jaws open and teeth sharp. It looked ready to bite down on his ear. "The Queen did not send me," Uncle Isco said crisply. He continued to watch the approaching ship, but the eyes of his shark shifted, first staring upward at his uncle's ear, next rolling sideways to pin its disapproval on Sam. I'm merely wondering why, with so many interesting visitors on island, you've chosen to volunteer for the watch, all alone on this mountain top. Sam turned away from the shark's eye, because among the interesting visitors were 20 females of marriageable age, no coincidence, and with them came their mothers, their fathers, their brothers. Sam had come here to get away from the endless introductions and festivities, as well as the feeling that he was being watched everywhere he went, hunted. He had just turned 19, and the last thing he wished to do was marry. I feel like meat hanging at the market, he admitted. Every prince must go to market. Every princess, too, said the man who had never married. Thank you, uncle. I'm cheered and comforted. Uncle Isco's lips curved. It's a wedding. Samatitamaha. Samatitama. Samititama. Not awake. There are 20 young ladies back at the pavilion. Surely one stands apart. Sam thought about it. No, not one. There were too many to consider. Lady Anna and her sister Androsina, who went by Nina, Princess Elei, Princess Huali, Princess Lalaga, and more ladies. Cinta, Neolani, Silvia, or was it Sylvia? Sam was having trouble matching names to faces, faces to family, family to clan and kingdom. It had been far simpler to toss aside his cockle shells and flee to the mountaintop. Uncle Isco said, What of Lady Rosamie? She's a charming girl. Marriage to her would bring the entire Salamasina archipelago to our side. A boon. I suppose. Uncle Isco frowned. What's wrong with her? Nothing. Silence from Uncle Isco. Then, what's wrong with you? My parents. Sam scuffed a boot. He was unaccustomed to discussing things with his uncle. Their conversations tended more toward war and politics and strategy, never feelings or softer things. At the mention of his parents, the shark stopped glaring at him, and so did Uncle Isco, who prompted, What about them? They loved each other, Uncle. It wasn't just duty. Sam had seen it. As a young boy, he had fell for it. It was not. Is that what you wish for? Maybe, Sam had answered truthfully before. There was nothing wrong with Rosamie. She was intelligent and pretty. Her uncle was the king of Salamasina. His grandmother approved of the match. Anyone should be pleased to marry her. Why wasn't he? Fetu pressed close to his neck, trying to burrow, offering comfort. Uncle Iska was quiet. What your mother and father shared was rare, he acknowledged, twisting the gold ring on his finger, a thick band with the image of a shark carved upon it. Most will not find love like theirs, and perhaps it is just as well. Sam turned his head. Why? Uncle Isco's shark looked away, and the entire marking retreated downward until it was hidden by the cloak. Watching Oleana and Sam, it was like watching fire sometimes. Fire burns, Samati. It leaves scars. For the first time in a long time, Sam remembered Lady Iosefina, Isco's lost love, who had married another. But before he could think too much about it, his uncle returned to an earlier conversation. Never mind, Lady Rosamie. What about Lady Anna? He trailed off at Sam's glum look and tipped his chin to the approaching ship. They won't go away, the Esperanzan, the Langlanese, Wakeo. They'll keep coming. Yes. Sam watched him clasp his hands behind his back, which meant a lesson was sure to follow. We are a small kingdom with vulnerabilities, Uncle Isco said. What happened to your mother showed us that. If we were to remain a kingdom, if we wish to remain a kingdom and not some wretched outpost for another, we must strengthen alliances with our old neighbors and our new, bound by marriage, then by blood. Sam knew what was expected of him, and still, there are other ways to build alliances. I don't have to marry right away. Samati, Uncle Isco spoke sharply. Your grandmother did not have to invite these ladies here. She is giving you a choice. It may not always be so. While you still can, while there is time, choose for yourself. Sam did not have to ask what he meant. His grandmother, Queen Magalahi, was not a young woman, and his mother was dying. She had been dying a long time. He could not inherit the throne. Tamarind was ruled by tradition, by law, by women. The choices that lay before him were few. He could marry a stranger and hope the gods blessed them with daughters, or he could find a cure for his mother's curse, one that had eluded them all for 10 long years. If he failed, the elders would gather and the crown would pass out of his family for the first time in 600 years. Sam hung his head. One should not complain about duty, about being the grandson of a queen. I understand. They both fell silent, standing side by side in a sea apart. Finally, after regarding the ship drifting ever closer, his uncle asked, "Who's this then?" "Bragadin, the Esperanzan." Uncle Isco's expression showed his distaste. "The one who sold you those useless dragons? That orphan peddler?" "The same." That was another thing. Tamarind relied on trade. The island spices would be worth little without the merchants who purchased them in vast quantities. It did not have the freedom to turn away every ship it wished. It did not, but it could turn away some. Bragadin of Esperanza was a celebrated dragoner, a favorite of his king, because he slaughtered the most sea dragons and sent a portion of his profits home to fill the royal coffers. But after Sam had been sold the sickly dragons, he had learned more about the captain than he wished. Stories whispered about of children in filthy workhouses paid little to prepare sea dragons for sale. One could always tell when someone had labored for him. Their hands were covered in scars, sliced repeatedly by dragon scale. Much of Bragadin's fortune had been built upon their small shoulders. Sam would keep such a man off his island forever if he could. Uncle Isco said, "What is he thinking coming here?" I wondered the same thing. "A bold pirate, and foolish one. How welcoming do you wish to be?" "Not very." Sam nudged the fruit bath with his head. "Fatu, like we practiced." The bat needed no further urging. He flew off. Moonlight made it possible to see his wings flapping toward the dragoner. He circled the anemone once, twice, 3 times, before diving straight down into the water. The sailors, already turned toward the island, had been watching the bat's approach. Half came forward, peering curiously into the sea after him, but the other half, one might say the wiser half, backed cautiously away from the railing. Sam smiled. A whirlpool formed beside the anemone, small at first, before growing larger. Rising from its midst was a bat of such great height that when it straightened fully, the water lapping at its wings, the ship appeared no larger than a toy boat in comparison. The span of his wings was massive. The wings themselves were full of holes. His eyes were empty black sockets, and his fangs were sharp and gleaming, the bright yellow of a hibiscus moon. And trapped between the fangs was a fully grown stingray. "There's no faulting your imagination, Samati." Amusement laced his uncle's words. "I almost feel sorry for them." From the sailors there was only shouting. The stingray twisted and turned, trying to escape, only to be flung onto the deck of the ship. The shouting grew higher in pitch, more scream than shout. At the sound, Sam murmured, "Well done, my dear. You can come—" He broke off as his glance fell on the ship and something odd. While most of the dragoners crowded the prow as far from danger as they could get, one remained in the back, at the stern. Just off the stern, a rowboat hung suspended by rope. The figure had reached over the railing and was yanking at the rope. The boat plunged before stopping a good 10 feet above the water. One end tipped higher than the other. It swayed back and forth in midair, appearing stuck. "Someone is not afraid of your bat," Uncle Isco remarked, "or else he really wants off that ship." Later, Sam would think back to this night and wonder at the ties that bound one person to another, across distance and time, across years. He should not have been on the cliff that night. She should not have been anywhere near this island. He said, "Uncle, will you finish my watch?" "What? Where? What? Where are you going, Samati?" Sam barely heard him because he was running, down the cliffside path that ribboned its way to shore, a path wide enough for one, forcing him to slow his pace if he did not wish to fall to his death. He kept his right palm on the cliff's rocky surface and his eyes on the ship. The wind sent his uncle's voice spiraling down to him, full of annoyance, telling him to stay out of the water for pity's sake. Stingrays never travel alone. A narrow beach appeared at the bottom of the cliff. Lying beside a boulder was an outrigger, polished and sleek, large enough for 3. Sam grabbed one of the oars propped against the rock. After pulling off his boots, he dragged the canoe into the warmth of the Nomi Nomi Sea. There was someone on the mountaintop watching them. Honolly stood at the railing with Captain Bragadin and the others, unable to look away from the lone figure who paced back and forth with a restless energy, perilously close to the cliff's edge. More guards would be about, she knew, patrolling the shore or concealed by tree cover, but he was the only one she could see. She kept him in her sights, along with a second figure who appeared beside him and did not look away. That is, until she saw the bat. "What's with the bird?" Moa called down from the forecastle, holding up a lantern. Moonlight followed a small flapping creature as it flew from the top of the cliff to the anemone, where it circled overhead. "That's no bird," Captain Bragadin said, neck craned. "That's a bat." One that dove straight into the sea in front of them, but not before Honolly spotted a tiny cuff above its foot, a glint of pearl, there and gone. She would have fallen over from the shock of it had she not been crowded in on all sides by dragoners. She knew that cuff. As a page, it had been her job to polish it. "Fetu," she breathed. "How could that be?" Captain Bragadin glanced at her sharply before turning back to the water, which had begun to bubble and hiss. An enormous bat rose from the froth and spread its wings. It was not alone. An angry stingray writhed between its jaws. When the stingray dropped onto the deck, the dragoners scattered in fright. Honolly alone stayed where she was. Fetu was Princess Oleana's marking, her companion. Honolly did not understand how he could be here when the princess was not. She looked back at the figure on the mountaintop. "Sam." Fetu leaned over the ship and swept a massive wing along the deck. The dragoners went flying, bodies knocked into poles and barrels. The red-bearded dragon sailed right by Honolly and fell down into the open hatch. A distraction. A distraction, Honolly realized. Fetu was a much-needed diversion. She ducked beneath the wing and ran to the stern where a boat hung suspended over the side. She pulled at the rope. The knots could not be undone. They were too tight. She did not have a knife to cut them with, but she did have a dragon scale. Honolly leaned over the railing, sawing frantically. The rope frayed and the boat dropped. One end hanging lower than the other. She stood on her toes, trying to slice through the last bit of thread. "I told you not to try it." Captain Bragadin. If she had not been so startled, if he had not grabbed her braid, yanking viciously, Honolly would not have done it. She stumbled back, her arm in the dragon scale coming down in a wide arc. The captain screamed. She watched as he fell to his face. She watched as he fell to his knees and clutched his face. Moa appeared, looking first at the captain, then at her. Honolly would have spoken, but he held a finger to his lips. Moa pointed to the Nomi behind her and mouthed a single word. "Go." Honolly shoved the dragon scale into her satchel. Terror drove her to the rail and over the edge, where she could no longer hear Captain Bragadin. His cries were lost among all the others. Rough waves slowed Sam's progress. Something bumped the outrigger, rocking it wildly and nearly turning it over. He froze, the oar just above the surface. His uncle's warning came rushing back, along with the knowledge that there were far scarier creatures than stingrays in the Nomi. Scarier, bigger, hungrier. But after several minutes passed and nothing rose up to eat him, he cautiously resumed rolling. Fetu's apparition continued to harass the dragoners. Sam left him to it. As a distraction, he was proving useful. He had nearly reached the anemone and the figure by the stern when he saw a larger person appear behind the first. They vanished from sight. A moment later, the smaller figure reappeared, tumbling from the ship and dangling from a rope until Sam brought the canoe directly beneath. He caught the briefest glimpse of a delicate profile, a girl. She dropped into the boat, landing in a crouch, head lowered. A long braid had come partially undone, obscuring her face. She was dressed in black dragoner garb, a satchel hung by her side. Sam hunkered down before her, asking in Esperanzan, "Are you hurt?" "No," she said in a clear, if a little breathless, Tamarindi. Lifting her head, she added, "That is Fetu." Sam rose slowly, staring down at her. It was the last thing he expected to hear, his bat's name on a stranger's lips. She rose too, a beautiful girl whose face he knew and did not know. Shock coursed through him, racing up his arms and through his heart like fire. "Who are you?" His foot struck the oar. He would have toppled overboard had she not grabbed his hands with both of hers, holding fast. She said very, very quietly, "Don't you know me, Sam?"